Hello and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Alejandro Macarrón, telecommunication engineer and business management consultant, join us to discuss demographic suicide and mutation of the West. Mr. Macarrón will speak for 10 to 15 minutes and open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to all questions, but we have many participants on this webinar, so I apologize in advance if we do not get to yours today. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Alejandro Macarrón.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you to the Middle East Forum and to all participants, to all viewers. We're going to speak about demographics, especially focus on the West, but not only, of the two main phenomena that are happening. One is that we have too few kids for replacing our population as we age and die. And the second is the mutation in the human landscape that is happening more in some countries than others through immigration of non-Western immigrants, and especially because of its cultural consequences of Islamic immigrants. We will start by trying to show a little bit what's the meaning of having too few kids. No? If we look at the main countries in the West, the most populated countries in the West, and also countries like Japan or South Korea, that are developed countries and close to the West in many values, no? None of them has a number of kids per woman that is sufficient to replace the population. Only Israel, that is not a big country in terms of population, and it's a unique country for in many aspects, has enough kids per woman to replace the population, and we will see what this means. No? By the way, all these numbers that you are seeing there on the screen will be lower in all the red countries, in all European countries especially, if you take out the effect that immigration is adding more kids per woman than native people. No? The case of Israel is rather the people from secular Jewish are having fewer kids. It's more religious people, and Arabic Jewish or Israelis were having more kids. And you see in the right corner, South Korea, that has a dramatic, is the world lowest. South Korea is a country that is self-destroying more rapidly than any other through having few kids. So if we think what this means, no? What having fewer kids than needed for replacement, no? If you have now 100 adults, young adults, you can think maybe between 18 and 35 to 40 years old people in a country. No? If you have 100 in a country, in a city, anywhere in a region, if you don't have, if you have 2.1 kids, within 30 years approximately, you will have the same number of young people. But if you're having fertility rates, a number of children per woman, as low as we are having in the United States, that is in red in this chart, in the European Union, not including the UK, in Spain in yellow, and in the region where I was born in Spain, in Asturias, that is not because I was born there, but it's the place with the lowest fertility rate in Europe. You will see what happens with these ranks of young people. No? You have now 100, within 30 years approximately, you would have in the United States 81, in Asturias 46, and in between you will have to see the numbers. By the way, the whites in the United States have a lower fertility than overall, so there would be something in between the overall United States and the European Union. And you see that ultimately in 50, 80, whatever years, I mean, we are having fewer and fewer young people. The rest of the population would also shrink like that, but a few decades later, no? Because this is about young people. But you see, if you have less than half what is needed for replacement of population, like in Asturias, you will lose 88% of your young people. Society, as a result, tends to shrink in population and to become very, very aged. No? In terms of aging of a population can be measured in several ways. One is the median age. Median age is the age that divides in two equal halves the population. No? And you can see there how different countries and the world have aged through the past 60 years, no? In 1960, in 1990, 2020, no? And you can see that some countries like Israel, for instance, has not aged very much. Aging is caused by two things. Now, one is that we have too few kids. The other is that life expectancy, we live longer, no? But
I think we're still seeing your first slide.
Excuse me?
I think we're still seeing your first slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Too stupid for the...
Oh.
Okay, let me... why we are seeing the first slide? I'm sharing slide, no? Okay. Well, let me try with compartiendo pantalla, sharing. I don't know. I have the other slides, so I don't know. I will probably continue without sharing slides then, because if I'm too stupid for these kind of advanced technologies, I would rather not use it. So what I was telling you is that Israel, for instance, has not aged very much because it has a lot of kids per woman. But other countries, like for instance, South Korea is aging super, super fast. Something that's interesting is that China is aging much, much faster than the United States, because the the drop in births has been much more sudden, no? due to the one-child policy. The Chinese have come from having many kids just 40 years ago to having one point something in average 40 years later. No? That's a very, very sudden change. And the country is aging very, very rapidly. No? My own country, Spain, is one of the oldest in the world, has the oldest populations in the world. Germany, Italy, there are others like that. No? So with the United States, as I was telling you, was until recently was an exception in low fertility in the West. It had nearly the replacement rate fertility, or it was at the replacement rate fertility, 2.1 children per woman. But fertility is now going down very fast. No? So what is the consequences of having few children? No? I say that societies tend to age. The next things that happens is that there tend to be more deaths than births. No? And this is already happening in the European Union in almost all the countries, except maybe France. And for native populations, not taking into account immigrants almost in all, and every year by more. No? In the United States, there is still more births than deaths, but not for the whites anymore, and probably for the Asian Americans that have very, very low fertility as well. In terms of the world, no? What is happening? The West is having fewer, the demographic weight of the West in the world is smaller and smaller, because we have our share of the total people is less and less every year. We have actually gone from being in 1950, the United States, North America, United States plus Canada was 6.8% of the world population. Now it's 4.7%, so it's around 1/3 less. But Europe is more dramatic, no? Because we have gone from being close to 22% of the population to less than 10%. So our weight is less than half, no? And in this century, if things continue as projected, and demographic projections are relatively easy not to be too wrong, no? Short-term demographic projections are very accurate, and longer-term are not that accurate, but still typically they're not terribly wrong unless trends change a lot. So if trends don't change, the West, if we call the West Europe plus North America, there is of course some Australia, other parts, but if we call the West Europe plus North America, Europe including Russia, we were 28% of mankind in 1950, and 150 years later, we will, our kids, our children now, or our grandchildren, will be just 8%, from 28 to 8%. So our weight will be much less. No? In terms of geopolitics, no? There is, in the past, the West had a much more productivity per person than the rest of the world. And that meant that even if we were fewer people, we multiplied our number by more productivity. And now, fortunately, almost all the countries in the world are developing, and that means that their productivity is raising. No? So as they have more productivity, the fact that they have more people will make that they will have more GDP. No? That's the reason why China already has more GDP in purchasing power parity than the United States. But the potential of China is having around 4 times the US GDP in maybe 20 to 25 years. Because if their productivity per person matches the level of the United States, and there is no deep reason why they shouldn't get this goal, they have 4 times more people that can work. No? And the next superpower will be India. India will have even more population than China very soon. They already have more young people. So that means that as they develop as well, they will catch up probably China and even go beyond China. Now let's talk a little bit. I was saying you that we were changing. I mean, immigration was changing the human landscape in Europe and also in the United States. However, the United States is mostly, you have a lot of Hispanic immigration that somehow is a little bit more similar culturally to the existing, I mean, the melting pot. You have been always United States has always been a very, very varied, diverse country. No? Europe was more homogeneous. No? What we're having now in Europe is that around 20% of all babies in the European Union come from non-European Union mothers, come from other parts of the world, typically from Africa and Asia. And in the case of Muslim populations, we are having countries like France, where no less than 25% of babies are from either first or second generation Muslim immigrants. In Germany, I have my estimates say that they would be around 15%. In Austria, around 14%. In Spain, around 10%. But in Spain, 25 years ago, we had practically no Muslim immigration. It's a very, very sudden change. No? So this is going to determine the future of our countries. This kind of immigration, if we are not able to integrate properly history, past history and recent history show that there could be clashes. No? It's not 100% sure what will happen, but this is what history tells us, that we should be very careful in managing foreign immigration, in integrating it, and because we will have a much more varied and complex societies. No? In the slides that I was not able to show you because I couldn't handle very well the Zoom program for showing you, but I gave to the Middle East Forum and they can share with you. And you will see, for instance, a village in Spain, a city with 50,000 people, where more than 50% of kids now are from African mothers, typically Moroccan. So this is a telluric change, no? A total change, and this has happened only in 25 years. So the landscape is changing, and it's critical that we as a society are able to assimilate this, because otherwise we may have social clashes. No? What can be done, as I was saying, going back to what we call demographic suicide, that we have too few kids. No? What are the consequences of having too few kids? As I said, populations tend to shrink and age. No? And this is very negative for the economy. The economy, if you have fewer consumers and they are, let's say, very old, no, they're gonna tend to consume less. But this is the demand part of the economy. In the supply side of the economy, if your workforce is also shrinking and age, you're going to produce less GDP. In terms of public accounts, of public government expenditure, governments are going to have to spend much more in old age pensions and healthcare for the elderly. But the tax revenue they will need for that is going to come from a shrinking and age workforce. So they are also in trouble. No? In terms of value of assets, typically assets depend on with a good demographics, with a growing economy, the value of assets like houses tend to go up in price long term. But if there are fewer people to buy houses, I mean, the value should go down. No? The value of assets, depending on demography, should tend to go down, and this is also very bad for wealth. There will be other effects that are not economic. For instance, there is much more loneliness now. There are many more people living alone now than in the past. In the United States, the percentage of people living alone has multiplied by more than 2 in 50 years. But in a country like mine, in Spain, it's much worse. It has multiplied by 6. Only 2% of Spaniards lived alone 50 years ago. Now it's more than 11%. No? Then you're going to have a democracy. It's going to become a kind of gerontocracy, because the old voters, no? Retired voters will be by far the most important, the dominant group in any poll. So, and their interest, it's logical, it's not their fault, is that the rest of the society transfers them wealth via taxes to pay for their pensions, for their healthcare, for their needs. No? But this is something that is fair. We owe to our to the elderly to provide them help when they're old. But if there is too much transfer of wealth from working people to the elderly, this is going to be very bad for the economy. And finally, the other effect, as I mentioned before, is that the West as such, the weight of the West as such in the world is going down. We are less and less relevant. This is especially clear for the case of Europe. The United States still is a much more dynamic country for its economy for many respects. It's a younger country. It's a country where a population still grows. But Europe is rather stagnated. We used to be called the old continent. Now we are old continent because we are old. And I think, Stacy, with that, I would finish my part, so we would go to Q&A.
Wonderful, thank you. Is the decline in demographic rates accelerating, and if so, at what rate?
It's accelerating in the sense that fertility rates have plunged in the past 10 years. For me, it's a surprise because I started to study this. I'm not a demographer. As you mentioned, I'm a business consultant and engineer, but I started to study this and I was astonished to how important this was and why nobody cared about that. And then what happened in the last decade is that, as I say, fertility rates, the number of children per woman has plunged to the extent that United States, for instance, is now at an all-time low. There are many countries that are at an all-time low. And when things are alone, if you are in the stock market and a stock is giving companies at an all-time low, that's a very bad sign. The opposite happens when you are at an all-time high. No? So it's accelerating, and I cannot tell you the future because nobody can tell for sure, but it doesn't look very good.
Thank you. How do you see the pro-birth measures in Hungary to get more children?
Hungary is betting very hard on that because they're in a very, very bad situation. I mean, they started losing population in 1981, and since then they have a huge cumulative loss. And they're really betting on this thing. I have some, I think, I mean, at the beginning they had some hike in births, but they're probably, I mean, there is an issue here is that people think that we don't have enough kids because it's very expensive to raise kids. And this is true to a certain extent. But when societies were much poorer in the past, we had more kids. So the core reason is not having enough money. Indeed, the 4th or 5th wealthiest countries in the world, that is like Luxembourg, like Norway, like Ireland, rich, wealthier in the terms of GDP per capita, Singapore, are also in their all-time lows. So going back to Hungary, yes, I think it's very good that they're doing these steps. I think they are maybe too focused on providing monetary help. Another thing that is very important, they're too focused on, they're just providing incentives to women. And women are more important than men. They have, of course, you have much more a burden for having kids, but men have also monetary burden. We should also contribute. And we are very important as well in deciding or not to have kids. So maybe this is things that they are doing. They should change a little bit the mindset. But again, it's very important what they're trying to do.
So what do you think is the main cause behind the lower fertility rates?
I mean, the world has changed dramatically in the past 200 years. So there are a number of many things that have changed. But the most important, there is one thing that is not bad, is that no kids die anymore. Practically no kids, infant mortality is very low. So in the past, we needed many children because half or more than half did not reach adulthood. No, they died before being adults. No? Now, unfortunately, almost no kid in a developed country dies. Very, very few. No? So this is a good reason. No? But for the rest, we have changed the mindsets. No, we are society has changed in values, because it can be something related to money, but it's not related to money. I say the wealthiest countries in the world don't have kids either. And so it's values. And what is values? No, values is, do we believe in God or not? Do we think that family is a very, very important thing for a person, or it's a maybe? No? For young people, many young people would like to have kids maybe in the future. No? In the past, it was not a maybe. It's one of the most important things that you could do when you are young is get married and have kids. No? So this has changed completely. And it can be seen people who are still more religious, no? Either Jewish or Christian or Muslim. No? And in the core values of these three religions is also having families with kids. They have more kids. No? For instance, I say that Haredim Jewish in Israel have like 3 times what secular Jewish have. It happens in the United States, it happens everywhere. But the fact is that fewer people are religious now in the West, no? Especially in Europe. And so this has a relationship. Of course, now you women are working out of, I say out of home, no? Because you also work at home. Always you have work a lot, but this again makes more difficult to have many kids. However, as I said, we don't need as many as in the past. So women working out of home and having 2 or 3 kids is something that is possible. Maybe it's very difficult to have 6 or 7 children and in the past, but it's not necessary because no children die anymore. No, this changes as well. And there are a lot of things, no, like we don't live anymore in the past. Most of the people were farmers or lived in the countryside. And it's true that kids were perceived as manpower very soon, no? When they grew maybe to 10 or 12 years old, and we don't live anymore in the countryside. So these kind of things have changed and have changed forever. But as I say, we don't need as many kids as in the past. So it's a matter of values. And then there is finally a very bad thing, is that governments don't care anymore. In the past, governments perceived their population as a source of wealth, of power, of might for the countries. Sometimes this was not so good because it was with, let's say, imperialistic objectives that we don't share anymore. But it's true that the might of a country is linked to its population. And governments in the past fostered birth rates in many countries for having a more powerful country. And now they don't care. Governments don't care if we have kids or not. Divorce, no? For instance, a family breakup. Family breakup has a tremendous impact in having fewer kids or more kids. No? For governments, they don't care if everybody divorces or if nobody. So, for instance, in Hungary, you know, they're trying to foster marriage, and people still can divorce, of course, in Hungary. But if fewer people divorce and more marry, in principle, we will have more kids. But governments nowadays don't care. No? So there are, as I say, many things together. But the main thing is what we would call values. No? Values for the general population, or also for elites. No? If elites are really worried about their countries, they should worry about birth rates.
Thank you. So along those lines, is your demographic concern a change with Western values or racial homogeny or the GDP and the economy?
I mean, it's my concern is that we are, I was born in, as I say, in Asturias. No? When I was born there, it was more or less the same population as now, but there were 4 times more kids. No? So I live I was a kid in a young society with plenty, full of life. No? So my concern is that we are dying. No? It's very sad that we are dying. I mean, we have been, and in a sense, we don't have to write that. We have inherited from past generations a kind of vibrant society. And we are gonna leave to our kids a very old society, and if they continue like that. So this is my concern. I'm from the West. If I was from South Korea, I would be concerned as well. Then economics, of course, matter. I mean, we're gonna have more economic difficulties, but loneliness is even worse for many people. I mean, and by the way, loneliness is also expensive, no? Because you don't share expenses with other people at home. No? But I think if you care about your people, about your society, I mean, you cannot see that it's disappearing and you don't do anything. No, I think that's very sad, not to see how we are becoming very old societies and nobody seems to care.
Thank you. Has any Western industrial country successfully reversed this trend in the past? And is there any way that you see going forward that we could change this?
I mean, France almost got it. France was a pro-natalist country until after World War II, because they had fought with a very, very difficult enemy. That was Germany, that had more people, had more population. So actually, their elites were pro-births, and they are younger than the rest of the West right now. But it's not enough what they have done. I said Israel. Israel again is a very, very unique country in the world. I mean, there's no country like Israel. Always, of course, also with the threat of the neighbors. No, that also maybe helps to think of what is important in life, and the family and the future of the country needs more people. No, and for the rest, some countries, as I said, were a little bit better off, like the United States, but it's not anymore. So I don't see there is no example of country that has really reversed this trend. However, I don't think any country has done what is necessary. For instance, this that I mentioned before about family breakup or family stability. No, countries don't seem to care. Now there are many countries that are providing monetary benefits, no, for parents, no, but they don't care if they are married, if they keep together or not. Abortion, no? Abortion is something that many countries are. It's in my country, in Spain, is free. I mean, you don't have to pay for it. I mean, it's legal, and it's not the same that if countries governments don't say that abortion is something that you don't care if you do it, that if they pay for it or it's forbidden. I mean, there are all kinds of range of things. But in Sweden, for instance, Sweden made an effort, and they got some results. Now they're going down again in fertility rates, but at the same time, abortion rates are very, very high. No? And with that, it's hard to get more births if you have a lot of abortions. No?
Yes, well, unfortunately, we're coming close to the end of our webinar. Could you give us some more resources that we could use to look into this further on our own?
Well, I wrote a couple of books about that. One is called Demographic Suicide in the West and Half the World. It can be bought in Amazon. I sent a presentation with the slides I was unable to show on display, but you can share with all the viewers. And I suggest that people read about that, do some research, but in a sense, it's not necessary to understand that if we don't have enough kids, we cannot go well. It's a society that doesn't have enough kids. It's not sustainable.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Mr. Macarrón, for speaking with us.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you.
As a reminder, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry will be taking a 1-week hiatus, but we will be back the following Wednesday. And please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for our webinar, The Kurds, What Does the Future Hold? With Dilman Abdul Qadir. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.